Like mem is 40, a is 5. Samach is 60, gimel is 3. Ayin beis, ayin is 70, beis is 2. With one exception, ban should have been nab, num beis. So what this person writes as an answer is just it's an interesting answer. I'm sure there's more than one answer to this question, but it's come up in this class before. There is something very significant about the number 9. You remember that? Number 9? Well, you had time to forget from last year, Pirkei Avos. Number 9 is the gematria of emes. Because emes is the gematria of 441. Aleph is 1, mem is 40, and the suf is 400, so 441. So how do we get to 9? Because in the system of gematria, right, there's something called mispar katan. You go to the smallest number. So you take the total 441 and you add that up. 4 and 1 equals 9. So in the system of gematria, sometimes you go by the general number, and sometimes you go by the small number, which is adding up all the numbers of the total. So that would mean that the gematria of emes is number 9. So the interesting thing is that the number 9 is the only number that no matter how many times you multiply it, it'll always be 9. It'll never change. No other number that way. So 9 times 2 is 18. 1 and 8 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 2 and 7 is 9. 9 times 9 is 81. 8 and 1 is 9. And I don't want to try the rest. I might make a mistake. But 9 times 5 is 45, 54. And everything equals 9. The remez, what it alludes to is that emes is something that doesn't change. It's always the same. All these names of Hashem add up to 9. Ma is 9. Ab is 9. And Sag is 9. The only one that's not 9 is Ban. What do? So it says that the final letters, final Chaf, final Nun, final Pei, final Tzadik, final Mem, all these letters continue. In other words, the final Chaf is, the final Chaf is 400. The final Mem is 500. The final Nun, the final Chav is maybe 600. How does it start? Final Chav, Mem, and Nun. The final Chav must be 500. The final Mem is 600. Final Nun is 700 according to Kabbalah. So Ban turns out to be 702. 702, the gematria is 9. So that's why they rearranged it the other way. What?
I understand.
While we're at it, I'll mention the other part that goes along with it. Nothing to do with the minor, but we're talking about number 9. Is that there was a question asked, and a lot of answers were given to this question also. Why does the Torah start with a beis? Aleph is the first letter of the Aleph beis. This is the beginning of the whole Torah, to start with an Aleph. In fact, the Aseret Hadibros starts with an Aleph, Anochi. So why does the Torah itself start with a beis? So one of the answers that are given is along these lines. If you count from beis every 3 letters, you'll get 9. So let's start. Beis, Gimel, Dalet. Write it down. Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4. 2, 3, and 4 equals All right. Keep going. Hey, Vav, Zayin. 5, 6, and 7. 5 and 6 is 11. 11 and 7 is 18. 8 and 1 is 9. The whole alphabet goes till the end. Each 3 letters will add up to 9. So again, the Torah starts with the base to show that this is 9, this is emes. In fact, the first 3 words of the Torah also begin with the word emes. Breishis is a suf. Bara is an aleph. Elokim ends with a mem. Each word ends with another letter. And these 3 letters spell the word emes. Okay, so you have the chart. You ever come along any of these names of Hashem, you can always refer back to the chart to see how that number comes there. That's number 1. Number 2, what we spoke about yesterday, about beating the Yitzhar with a stick. And of course, it doesn't mean to beat yourself, knock your head against the wall, chas v'shalom, or to go out and scream at yourself. But it means that, in a sense, I take a harsh measure towards my Yitzhar. So something came to my mind after class, which I thought would be an interesting example. There's a shliach, unfortunately, that passed away. He was a head shliach in Peru. Someone wrote a story that he heard from him a few years ago, that he has a magazine, not a magazine, but it's like a one paper that he gives out to his community, like a lot of people do that, like just a sheet with different words of Torah, something about the Parsha. He gives it out to his community. And what he would do is always put something in from the Rebbe. So he'd open up the Igros Kodesh, the Rebbe's letters, and choose a letter. And I guess he decided, instead of choosing, he's going to open up whatever comes. That's Hashgacha Pratis, he'll put that into his, and that's what he did for a very long time. One time, he opens a letter, and the letter is to someone who was considering intermarrying, and the Rebbe writes her how destructive this would be. And then the Rebbe writes in that letter that if you, God forbid, will marry out of the faith, you are helping the Nazis. On one hand, it's a very powerful thing. On the other hand, how could I print such a thing here in Peru, where there are so many people that unfortunately family members have married out? It's one thing that you tell them it's not a good thing. It's another thing when you compare it to something like that. So he was debating back and forth, should he not? On the other hand, he does it every week as Hashgacha Pratis, but the people probably aren't going to be very happy to see such words. At the end, he decided to print it. And whatever he was afraid of actually happened. There was a big uproar in the community. For weeks, he was getting phone calls. He was being screamed at. People who were prominent members in the community had family members that married out. And how could you do such a comparison and say that they're helping the Nazis? We know that touches everybody to the core. They actually demanded of him to write an apology, a public apology. He said after a few weeks, it finally calmed down, like a lot of controversies calmed down, and life went back to normal. A few months later, he gets a phone call from a girl. They had met a long time ago, but they sort of parted ways. They disagreed, and she went her own merry way. And she calls him up and says, I want to meet with you. Okay. She meets with him, and she says that she's planning to marry this non-Jewish man. Her parents are very upset. And every time she came home, they got into a fight. It was only getting worse and worse. And she finally decided that she's not going home anymore, because every time she goes home, it's just a big fight. Her parents had arranged that she should meet with this rabbi. His name is Rabbi Blumenfeld, which she met with him. And also they only argued. She did not hear anything he said. She didn't listen to anything he said. And there's no point in meeting again because we're just not on the same page. And that was it. He said recently she had to go home to get something. She went home and she saw this sheet of paper on the table. She picked it up, not thinking much, and she starts reading it. And she reads the part that the Rebbe says to this woman that by you marrying out, it's like you should know you'll be helping the Nazis. She said, I got so angry, I took the piece of paper and I ripped it to shreds. How dare you say such a thing? A little while later, I said to myself, wait a second, calm down. Why don't you think about, and she's talking to herself, what it says. Maybe there's something there. She said, she thought about it, and she realized what she's doing, and she decided to drop the relationship, and she came to him to ask for forgiveness that she ripped up the letter, the thing that she wrote. So I'm thinking of this story. Here's a woman that probably her parents had all sorts of dialogues with her and debating with her and explained to her why it's no good and why it's not acceptable what she wants to do. Didn't help. The rabbi had conversation with her. It didn't help. She saw these words that said, and not only that, these words were it was so strong that her first reaction was she ripped it to shreds. She was so angry. But ultimately, that shook her up and she began to think. And eventually, she came to the realization that she's doing something very wrong. So I guess that's an example of using the stick. What would it mean on a personal level? I guess there are many examples, but let's even use this mimer itself. Let's say the mimer talks about anger. We know that anger is a very negative character trait. And when you learn what it says in Torah about anger, especially you study Pirkei Avos, you study the Rambam that talks about character traits. The Rambam describes anger as one of the worst character traits. Anger is a very destructive character trait, to the extent that there's a halacha in Hilchos Shabbos that a malacha is only if you do something productive, constructive. But if you do something which is destructive, it's by definition not malacha, because you're destroying. One exception is if a person gets angry, blows his top, and out of anger, he breaks something. It's a malacha. Why? So the Rambam says, because for him, it's constructive. This is calming down his Yetzer Hara. So listen to this very interesting Yetzer Hara. What calms him down? To break something. And we know that's what people do. They get upset. Imagine you're on your computer, and he's not listening to you. You click on a certain button, something else comes up, and it's not working. If people get so angry, they break the computer, they throw it against the wall. Now, could you tell me what are they going to gain by doing that? People slam doors, break windows, throw things around. What does that have to do with the price of fish in China? And the answer is, it has nothing to do. It's just anger. When a person's angry, it's a certain destructive energy, and the only thing that'll calm him down is destroy something. So it's a terrible midah. And the Rambam writes that with all midos, all character traits, people should go in the middle path, not to extremes. But with anger, you can go to the extreme because anger is such a destructive character trait. In Gemara, there's a Gemara site that pages about anger, how much of a negative character trait it is. But let's say somebody would learn this mimer, and after if he gets angry, loses his temper, and as a result of that, he destroyed the relationship that he had with someone. Gets a job, and he gets angry at the boss, and he loses his job. He gets angry at his co-workers and gets into a fight. And he says to himself, what are you doing? Every time you lose your temper, you're causing so much damage. And he tries to talk to himself, and he just can't. He has a temper, and something goes wrong, boom, he explodes. And he learns a mimer, and the mimer says that you get angry, you're like an animal, you're like a Kislev. You're acting without seichel, you're like all emotion. You imagine that you are like a lion, like a tiger, like an animal in the jungle. And somehow, if a person thinks along those lines, it jolts him and thinks like, this is really very low. And that's basically the concept we're talking about. It's not beating. It means to use a harsh approach to shake off my Yetzer Hara. So I brought those sheets. I gave out the sheets from Tanya. Of course, you have to see the context of the whole chapter, but this is chapter 29 in Tanya, and it begins with a statement from the Zohar, where it says that sometimes you take a log and you put it into the fire, and the log is so thick that the fire doesn't catch. you ever did a campfire, you probably know what we're talking about. What do? So you have to take this big log and chop it up into smaller pieces, and then the fire will catch. So the Zohar, it says that sometimes the Yetzer Hara is so thick that the fire of the neshama doesn't catch. So I'm thinking and I'm meditating and I'm learning and I'm focusing on the greatness of Hashem, and it just doesn't connect. And therefore, the Zohar says, so you have to do the same thing, break the log. So in this parak, it talks about what that means. But one of the things is what it says here on page 395. Let's look inside. So like I said, the actual source for this is Gemara. But this is the Alter Rebbe's words. V'gam yarim aleha. I'm looking at the middle paragraph on page 395. A person should scream, and it comes from the word thunder. Thunder against his Yetzer Hara. V'kel raj v'regas. Lashpila. To humble it, to put it down. Kamayim Razal. Our sages say, "Lo'ilam yargiz adam yitzatev al Yetzer Hara shenema rigzu val tichtov." There's a pasuk in Tilim, chapter 4, and it says, "Be angry, have rage, and you won't sin." What's the connection? It means to rage against my Yetzer Hara, the Hainu. Lirgeiz al nefesh habahamis she Yetzer Hara v'koil raj v'regiz b'machshavta. Remember, in the mind, not screaming out loud and chasing other people out of the shul. But I'm thinking this in my mind. And you say to the Yetzer Hara, Atara v'rosha meshukes v'mesuv v'menuvu. You're truly evil, wicked, whatever, abominable and loathsome and disgraceful. So what's the point there? In other words, you're not using logic, you're just putting him down. And you're telling yourself how low this is. And these are the kind of words that then what do you say? The continuations on the next side. I must say, how long would you continue to conceal Hashem's infinite light from me? And you repulsive one, why is he using these negative words? Because in other words, what he's saying is when the Yetzer Hara is so strong, you have to sometimes give him a shot in order to calm him down. And that's the club that he's talking about. It's interesting. Another example of this would probably be, everyone knows, what are the differences between Chassidus and Musar? That in Musar, it talks a lot about punishment. Punishment of this world, punishment in the next world, and it describes the different punishments for different averos. In Chassidus, we rarely focus on that, and we focus on other things, but not on punishment. And what's the reason for that? There are basically two reasons that are given. One reason is that because when a person's mind is occupied with thoughts about negative things, they actually draw down gevura, negative energy from Hashem. If a person's thinking about fires and burning and punishments, so basically the mere fact that I'm so occupied with those thoughts, I'm drawing down Hashem's gevura, chas v'shalom, that could do damage. The second thing is that when a person is motivated to do what's right and not to do what's wrong, because the punishment, it's not a true, pure motivation. Because that means what's motivating me is not love for Hashem, it's not even fear of Hashem. What's motivating me is fear of me having pain. That's what it comes down to. So it's more about me than it is about Hashem. So therefore, generally speaking, what do we do to motivate ourselves to do the right things? But when you learn Chassidus, you learn about the greatness of Hashem, Gadlus Hakel, and Hashem Shgocha Pratis, and how we should love Hashem, and Hashem is infinite, and we should fear Him, and He's the one who controls the world. All these kind of thoughts are mainly about the greatness of Hashem, and that should motivate us. Nevertheless, even Chassidus was so much against this, but it says that if sometimes a person finds that he has a certain Yetzer Hara that keeps coming and coming and coming, and actually causes him to do an avera, to literally violate Torah, and all the thoughts and all the meditation is just not helping, sometimes a person should think about what the punishments are, because that would stop. So even though generally speaking, that's not our point to focus, generally speaking, that's not the true, pure motivation. We don't focus on that. I mean, it's part of Torah, and definitely it could be used for someone who can't relate to anything higher or deeper. But nevertheless, if there's something which is really out of hand, out of control, and it's causing me to commit a sin one time and again, then this is, in a sense, the club. I tell myself, do you realize what the consequences will be? And that shocks the person into changing. And then later you can start, not chas v'shalom to continue with this route. That's just to sort of get me to stop and listen. And then I could reason and use seichel to influence and to inspire my nefesh bahamis. Okay, so let's go back to the Maimer. So use the example of a log. When you have a log and you want to make a wooden bowl out of it, a wooden cup, what you have to do is first you have to cut it out from the outside. Now you have a piece of wood, and then you cut it from the inside to make it, to have a way of receiving and be able to accept in it water, soup, or wine, whatever it is. So let's start from those words again. Meaning to say that this is not the Avodah, this is just to get me started, that the donkey should listen. And once the donkey listens, then the real Avodah is using my seichel to inspire. So let's start from where we're starting from. So it's so much far from the top and the bottom that there's too much counting. So it's pretty much in the middle of the page. Look at the last word on the page is mibachutz. Maybe that'll help you find it quickly. Page 6. Mibachutz. What? Underline. Okay. Oh, I thought it was only underlined in my place. Okay, so that's exactly where we are. This is rak chakikim mibachutz. This is just carving it out from the outside. Chakikim means to carve out. Like when you have a block of wood. If you want to take a block of wood that's not a vessel and make it into a vessel, first of all, you have to cut it out and carve it out from the outside. And you make it smoother. Then you make an inside kibble that you can make this piece of wood receive something in it. The same thing is in the ruchnisdik avodah. This idea of angering is lipa by a bittul v'achnoah b'chlal. It's to cause the general to humble my nefesh bahamis, to cause them generally to be more subdued, and then to make him into a vessel. And the vessel means to receive mayach v'lev, the nefesh elokis. That now, once it's in a vessel, the nefesh elokis could reason with it and explain it, the greatness of Hashem. Pirush leilam yargiz adam. What does it mean a person should always anger? It says an interesting thing here. Every person has in him anger that comes from Gevura. There is no person, doesn't consist of good and the negative. Everyone has in him this anger, for whatever it may be, but it comes from Situ Dara. So I have to take that anger and redirect it, it should do something positive. He should pour it out on the Ra. Be angry at, why am I doing this? Why am I this way? And that's the anger he's talking about. Mrs. Harwitz,
yes.
You see these words here? Every person has anger in them.
Yeah. You're asking me if I agree.
No, I'm saying this is consistent with the
Yes.
Sarno.
Oh, yeah, it is.
That's what to show you.
But the thing is, so you can be angry, but the only thing you can be angry at is your anger. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, he's saying there's a way to direct it somewhere. But this idea that people have subconsciously
Yeah.
repressed anger is pretty much clearly in this mind.
Right.
This is something that we know about a certain doctor who has a very unique approach to healing back pain. And it's based on this principle, which is actually here in the mind. Okay, if anyone has severe back pain, I'll talk to you after class. True. Shoulder, neck, whatever. This is what's called the olah. The stick, lirdas base nefesh bahamis sheba'adam, to beat the nefesh bahamis within the person. Now he says Remach is the spear. Who Krishma. He's connecting Remach to Krishma, even though before he said Remach and Krishma was a sword, but apparently it has both things in it, a sword and a spear. And of course, the difference between a sword and a spear is that a sword is only used for the enemy that's close. A spear is a little bit like a bow and arrow. It's also used to throw in the distance. With the Remach, it's meant to take away the chayus from the enemy. Through the Krishma, we eradicate the Ra in the person completely. So he's going to explain what that means. What is the difference between the club and the spear? In the emotions of the Nefesh Bahamis, there are two categories. Two categories. One is desires and drives that the Nefesh Bahamis has, but they're permissible. They're not godly, has nothing to do with Hashem, nothing to do with spirituality, but there's nothing that's prohibited about that particular drive. Base taivasita, isun. And the second is taivas, which are desires for things which are not permissible, that go against Torah. So that means that a nefesh bahamis is made up of klipas noga, like it says in Tanya, and klipas noga is a mixture of good and bad. So a person has a taiva, a desire, a burning desire and a drive for all sorts of physical pleasures, but they're permissible, that comes from the good part. When a person has a taiva for the things that are not permissible, that comes from the bad part. Well, the neged b'chinas ha'alev. So when we're talking about the first category, you don't need the spear. Dai la kaisa b'shevet. It's enough to use the club. Shu b'chinas Allah. Shaydeza, what you're trying to accomplish, not to destroy. What you want to do is to humble. Shaydeza nichna, the Nefesh Bahamis becomes humble. And then you could, you can transform the Nefesh Bahamis, that the Nefesh Bahamis should have love for Hashem. And you take that desire and that drive that it had before for materialistic things, you turn that around and they have the same drive and desire, but now it's towards godliness. But the second category, when a person has a desire and a drive for things which are prohibited, there's nothing to turn around in. In that case, that's when the sword comes into the picture, or the spear. This is something that has to be eliminated completely. So let's say a person is passionate about sports. It's not awesome. It's not godly, but there's nothing wrong with it. And then this person gets more involved in Yiddishkeit, and he's still passionate. He's on fire and he's passionate, but the passion that he had before for sports, now that passion is being directed towards learning, towards davening, towards mitzvahim, towards other things. So in a sense, he's not destroying the passion, he's just redirecting it in a different direction. But if a person has a passion for something which is asur, that's something you have to eliminate completely. So for this we use the stick, and for this we use the sword or the spear. Now we come to the shield. We're up to number 5.
For the first category, we use what?
What?
For the first category, we use?
The first category? First category is called taivas heta, which means desires that are permissible, passions and desires that are permissible. So for that, we don't have to destroy it. We try to do the opposite. We try to, like even Begashmi is an animal. We use the animal for good things. I can ride on the animal could plow. So we're using my Nefesh Bahamas, that passion, I want to redirect it towards Torah mitzvahs.
So we don't use any.
No, I need the stick to do what we said before. First of all, to humble it, that it should listen to what the Nefesh Elokis has to say. And the Nefesh Elokis will inspire my Nefesh Bahamas that this passion that you have is something that should be used for things that are more meaningful in life. And then it goes in that direction. I remember many years ago when I was in Australia. Australia is a country, I don't know what it's like now, but then they didn't have conservative movement. They only had reform, which they called liberal or orthodox. So there was a certain individual, was an influential person, used to write a column in the most popular newspaper there, Jewish newspaper, and he began a campaign to introduce conservatism in Melbourne. And basically his reason was very normal. Orthodox is extreme in one direction. Reform is extreme in the other direction. Conservative is perfect, right in the middle. A little bit Torah mitzvahs, a little bit not, and it's more balanced, and it's a perfect thing. And basically, the rabbis met with him and they tried to convince him to stop it. At the end, someone made a share with him. He started to learn the Sichos, and eventually he changed his course. Now he had two possibilities. One said, wow, look where I was going. I was ready to bring in a whole new path. What would happen if you bring conservative movement in such a place? Two things will happen. People that normally don't want to be Orthodox, but the reason why they're Orthodox, so they go to Orthodox shul because they feel that the reform is too far to the left. Now that we have conservative, they'll lower their standards. You also have the opposite. People that don't want to be reformed, but because Orthodox is too extreme, so they're in the reform place. Oh, now that there is conservative, that'll raise their standards. But for the most part, it would probably bring more people to lower their standards than to lift their standards. So they worked very hard to stop him. And eventually he understood it and he started to get more involved in Yiddishkeit. So he had two choices. One choice is to say, well, look what I was doing with my leadership qualities. I could have made a lot of problems. I'm going to take a new job. I'm going to cut diamonds. That's it. Not deal with people and movements and whatever. But instead, he continued in that direction. He continued with his articles in the newspaper. He continued with developing his leadership qualities, but now he used it to spread Yiddishkeit. So it's the same Nefesh Bahamas, the same fire, the same passion, the same drive, but the drive went in a different direction completely. So every one of us on a personal level, then we need just the stick to tell the Neshama, stop what you're doing and redirect. But if it's something which is usher, of course, you have to get rid of it completely. Now the third thing is the shil. Vinyan tris. I guess tris is Aramaic probably. In Hebrew it's called mogeh. Mogeh means a shil. Lahogeh min achitzim, something that I need a shield to protect me from the arrows. So if the enemy is shooting arrows, I put up my shield and it blocks the arrows. And I was throwing stones, I pick up my shield and it protects me. What is this in davening? Davening is a time of war. I mentioned it at the beginning of the lesson, but here's, the quote from the Zohar, Shas Tzulusa, it's Aramaic. The time of davening is Shas Krava, is a time of war. Tzrichen lubish, talis and tefillin. That's why men have to wear talis and tefillin. The talis and the tefillin, heimnasin mogen or michsa, it becomes a shield to protect me. There is an enemy, an opponent that's standing right opposite me and trying to stop me from davening. The taivas, giving me all sorts of thoughts that are disturbing, all sorts of thoughts which are inappropriate. And when does it come? And these thoughts come very strong, dafka then, Like people who are fighting with each other. And he makes a reference to chapter 28 in Tanya. Chapter 28 in Tanya, should have made a copy of that too. Maybe I'll bring it tomorrow. The Alter Rebbe says that these are 3 chapters. The Alter Rebbe talks about simcha and sadness or depression. 26, 27, 28. And he goes through different reasons why people might be down. And one of them is when a person is down because he's trying to daven and all sorts of negative thoughts come to his head. The Alter Rebbe says most people will come to the conclusion that my davening is worthless and I'm a good for nothing. And that's why when I daven, instead of concentrating on these holy words of davening, I'm thinking about business, thinking about money, thinking about my breakfast and lunch, or thinking even worse than that. And that's when I'm davening. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya something very powerful. That's not true. It's just the opposite. The reason why these thoughts are coming during davening, in fact, many people will find that some of these disturbing thoughts come during davening more than any other time of the day. How does that make sense? So the answer is because the Yetzer Hara doesn't want me to grow spiritually. So Dafka, when he feels threatened, that's when he attacks even more. So when I'm davening, that's when my Yetzer Hara feels threatened. In a sense, the fact that my Yetzer Hara is throwing these arrows at me is Dafka because my davening is a good. In other words, Alter Rebbe says like this: if the disturbances would come from me, okay, there's something wrong with me. But imagine someone's trying to daven, and someone else, another person, or someone, let's say, who's not Jewish and can't stand this person davening, is going to stand there and scream, play loud music, do all sorts of things to disturb your concentration. You can't say something wrong with me. It's someone else is doing it. So in a sense, it's someone else. It's my Yetzer Hara trying to stop my Nefesh Elokis from concentrating on davening. So we need a shield. What's the shield? The talus and the tefillin.
But we don't have.
What?
What about the woman?
Oh, what about the woman? I was suspecting that someone might ask that question. I need to take a drink before this.
Maybe for the men it's harder.
And you want me to say yes?
No, I
Have no choice if I want to keep this job here. Yeah. So it does say in Chassidus, and even before Chassidus is brought down, that one of the reasons why women don't have these mitzvahs like tefillin and tzitzis, talis, is because women are naturally, these are all things that sort of help us be more aware, more sensitive to godliness. And a woman, because of the neshama that she has, is naturally more sensitive to godliness than a man. So that means that a woman has the koyach without the talis and the tefillin to be able to protect herself. Plus, it does say in the Arizal that when the men put on tefillin, it helps everyone, men and women. In other words, it's just like in the human body. Different organs have different functions. So when a person eats, you don't say, well, my mouth ate, so therefore my mouth isn't hungry anymore. But what about all the other parts of my body? It's one person, one body. And when I eat, it does something for the whole person. And the same thing is with certain mitzvahs. Let's say, it says in Tanya, there are 613 mitzvahs. What about the mitzvahs that a king does? And we don't even do it. What about mitzvahs that the Kohanim do? And we don't do that either. So the answer is because it's given to these specific people, it helps everybody. They include everybody. So men and women, when men do certain mitzvahs, the effect of it is for everyone else as well. As it's known, it says in Tanya right in the beginning, in Tanya it says that when you do mitzvahs, this creates a garment for the soul. This garment is like a suit of armor. It's a protection. This protects us from the klippos, these rocks and I guess arrows that they're throwing at me, that it shouldn't be able to affect me. So again, it doesn't mean physically I take the towels and put it over my head. Okay, now I'm protected. The thoughts are in your head. So with the towels over your head, you can still have all the thoughts in the world. So obviously it means that spiritually it creates a protection. And nothing is automatic. I still have to make the effort. But this is something which is a divine assistance to help me be able to protect myself from these thoughts. And that's the shield. That's the fifth weapon that he's talking about. Okay, we'll stop here.